Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, French President Macron has signed numerous bilateral deals in his ongoing state visit to China. How can China and France help each other realize their own goals? High-level inter-Korean talks are taking place with the South Korea-hosted Olympics just a month away. Can these talks be more than just Olympic truce? We're going to discuss that after this. And let's still begin it with the relations between China and France. We begin right here in Beijing, where French President Emmanuel Macron continues his three-day state visit to China. Following a welcoming ceremony hosted by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People, the two leaders held official talks and oversaw the signing of bilateral deals in aviation, culture, and environmental protection. Macron said he was hoping for more bilateral cooperation within the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. After their meeting, the two leaders gave a joint press conference. Let's listen in.
Human society is facing many challenges. As world powers with a long historical and cultural heritage and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and France shoulder special responsibilities and historical missions. We'll carry on our friendship and start our new work. We'll safeguard and develop the China-France relationship.
We are at a critical point to establish a joint strategy to build mutual trust. You mentioned several very essential points, and I would like to contribute. You mentioned our agenda in Europe and in the world. In the world, we face several major issues such as climate change, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank President Xi for his efforts when the Paris Pact was threatened.
For more on French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to China, we are now joined in our Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, who is the director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, to our program. Also, both in Paris, we want to welcome Ms. Anne-Elizabeth Moutet, who is a political commentator and columnist at The Telegraph and Weekly Standard. Welcome back to our program, Ms. Moutet. And Joab Toker, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. Welcome as well. I want to start with you, Ms. Moutet. Remember, just a few days ago, we were discussing about the French president's possible visit to China, and now he is making it. I remember then there were quite some differences of opinions between you and then our Chinese panelists. So, what about now? What do you make of the so far result?
I think what you are seeing is what Macron does best, which is something that has been thought through in advance, and a great deal of attention to symbol and detail and finding common ground. It's very interesting that President Macron has quoted former Premier Deng Xiaoping, and he said, you know, it doesn't matter what color a cat is if it catches mice. And that is exactly the Macron policy. We've seen this with his policy with America. He believes in pragmatism and achieving everything that can be achieved, notwithstanding his disagreement on something else. And that's what he's showing now, I think.
Ah, interesting. Well, there are 50 shades of gray, as they say, at least. So from white to black, where are we? What color exactly is it, Professor Toker? Between China and France, your assessment?
Well, to place it on a scale of colors would be original, so somehow difficult, but I'll take the challenge, as the ambiance, as the overall atmosphere seems to be indeed symbolically and concretely very positive. I mean, that's what leaders are supposed to do during this kind of summit event. But for the time being, about more of the half of the way through over these 3-day state visit of President Macron, things seem to be on the how should I say on the color scale, brighter side.
Okay.
Let's put it on 4/5 of the measure towards the brighter side of the horizon.
4/5 of the measure toward the brighter side. Okay. Well, it's a kind of math. We need to work it out. Mr. Cui is smiling here in Beijing. Is China's assessment similar to those of our friends from France right now?
Yeah, I think indeed, because now we are become, partners for any, cooperation. I believe that this visit by President Macron will give, a new page exactly for China-France relations, and of course, I hope that it will give a very, very positive influence.
But ambiance.
Yes.
In the French word was the Professor Joab Toker just used, but I wondered, Mr. Cui, here's the real thing. Is it about the ambience, or is it about the content?
Yes, I think now we should have, comprehensive understanding about the complicated, relations between China and France.
Okay, let's talk about trade.
Yes.
There are already some deals that we mentioned earlier in our program, about environmental protection, aviation, and some of the other climate change as well. But, besides this, which is what we have already done before, besides these areas, what else has China and France achieved so far? Strategically, are these two countries closer or more on the same common ground?
Yeah, exactly. I think if we look at these relations between China and France, undoubtedly, trade economy is important because it's not the war for these bilateral relations.
Right.
Also now, even for this trade issue itself, I think now, yes, China could do something to help this kind of a trade balance, just like the proposal from the French side that China should import more from France. But now the question, I think the issue for this trade problem is, indeed, it depends on how could President Macron to push forward the reform in France, and how could France promote its competitiveness of its products. Because as we know, China is a...
You asked a very good question,
yes.
Mr. Cui, because I think what Mr. Cui is saying, Ms. Mute, is that strategically, what is France thinking about itself, economically speaking, trade-wise as well, and strategically, is there some bigger goal that France and China, besides, bits and pieces, let's say, buying from France, what else the two countries really can work together for a bigger vision? Ms. Mute, do we read anything out of this talk?
I think yes, and I think that was the plan all along. Where we have problems is the imbalance in the large trade deficit between France and China, and sometimes a feeling that whereas France is relatively open to Chinese goods and Chinese technology, China makes it much more difficult for French businesses. And I think there have been some cautious progress achieved during this visit, and we will see this at the end, because President Macron came and he made the case for a quid pro quo, saying, on the one hand, as one of the leading countries of Europe, I am saying that Europe should be more careful, and he said this, Europe should be more careful in allowing strategic areas of its economy be bought by the Chinese. That on the other hand, we need to have something that will mean that China can come, and we can have something that would be proportional instead of being completely imbalanced. And I don't think that was entirely refused from the Chinese side. I think there's an understanding of this.
Okay, interesting point, Mr. Cui. I have to come back to you because it has a lot to do with the Chinese attitude and also reflection about that. What exactly is it? Is President Macron from France trying to make some bargaining chips with these kind of arguments toward China, getting more benefits for France? Or do you think there is political gains that he could have when he go back home with remarks like this?
Yeah, I can understand that now there is a very, very difficult situation for President Macron, and also even for some other European leaders, especially when they are living in a situation with the rise of populists. As we understand, now President Macron tried to keep a balance between, to look for more cooperation with China, on the other side, to try to call for kind of a sense of competitiveness from Europe with China and with some other emerging economies. I hope that yes, if he could keep the balance between those two, sides. But indeed, once he lose the balance, I think that there will be some risk for President Macron and some other politicians in Europe to get a kind of a conflicting situation.
I see. Politics is all about balancing all the time. Professor Toker, you know better probably than I do about that. So how about the balancing President Macron did this time? I mean, you think about the situation France is facing. Of course, President Macron, young, energetic, wants to be the leader of the Europe. Particularly at the time when Germany is still struggling with the forming of the administration, and certainly the chancellor, not necessarily doing very well right now. But, whether France could really shoulder that task and France will be able to solve its own problem is going to be one of the lenses that people are using to examine France to see whether it could continue to be the leader of Europe. Professor Toker.
Well, that's indeed a very interesting perspective, but one should be careful, I believe, in terms of some of the commentaries that we've been hearing in Europe in general, and in France in particular, as you may imagine, over the last few months regarding the role of France and the new energies which the young President Macron is injecting into French potential leadership roles in the world. One should distinguish between the short run or the short-medium run, in which indeed, as you mentioned, we have a particular situation. Germany is looking for a coalition government. It's going on like that for about 4 months now. It would probably take a little bit more, but there will be a government in Germany. On the short, medium run, we have Britain, of course, involved in the Brexit procedure. We don't know exactly how long it would last and what would be the medium run or long run fallouts of that. So it's true that conjuncturally speaking, you see a president in Paris which has a solid coalition, which has a new agenda, which has energy, which has youth, which is not ideologically forged in his overall approach, which is extremely pragmatic, which has President Trump and President Putin and President Erdogan coming over to Élysée Palace. Chinese president soon will be coming this year, we were told today. So there is that impression that France could furnish some kind of new leadership, but behind that there are objective elements, which is the economic power of France, for example, which is about 1/2 of overall German overall economic might, about the strategic potential, say, over maritime and ocean space. If you compare the British, for example, navy and maritime traditions and extensions to the French one, you have to be a little bit more cautious.
There we go.
One distinguished difference is that France, contrary to Germany and contrary to Britain, France does have territories in the Asia-Pacific.
Okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing, Professor, and the other panelists as well. Time is precious. We all understand that, particularly at a time of dramatic change. Everybody, every country has the ambition of playing a bigger and better role of a changing world. That's well understood and well respected. The thing is whether you have got the qualities and the capabilities and eventually the ability to implement and work with the others. So here are some of the things that we can talk about. One of the things is what initiative you brought to the world and to your neighbors about a way forward. Do you have the strategies? Do you think this strategy is attractive enough to bring others on board as well? And thirdly, will this strategy be inclusive or exclusive? If it is the former, it's going to be very attractive. So, having said that though, China, France right now, do they have anything like this to work on? Mr. Cui, very briefly from you first.
Yeah, I think firstly, indeed, as two big countries, Both China and France now we share the more, especially I think on the global governance. For example, how about the climate change issue, or counter-terrorism, or some other. But also on the regional level, we hope that China-France cooperation could give a very, very positive influence on China-Europe cooperation. But frankly, on the bilateral trade and some economic issue, I think still we need some more sensorily cooperation from France.
Mr. Cui, I have to say you're so diplomatic. You sound so diplomatic. So let me just say it directly. Ms. Mute, what about Belt and Road Initiative? Do you see France is making effort, or do you see China is making effort that the two sides could meet in between and try to bring something more than what has been achieved so far? Ms. Mute.
Well, we have one very good example in terms of French diplomacy reaching out to China and finding common ground, and that has to do with the climate change talks and the Paris Accord. And this, again, is coming at a very specific time where there's a bad man in this. I mean, America decided, under Trump, decided to walk out of the Paris Accord. China is well treated by the Paris Accord. This is one of the reasons why America walked out. And China is very keen on keeping the Paris Accord, and the Paris Accord, as their name indicates, was signed in Paris.
But Ms. Mute, let me just say frankly, the Paris Accord was achieved last year, okay? And there is no bad man or bad person anymore on some of the other issues, for example, about the Belt and Road Initiative, about connectivity. So will China and France still got the momentum and the incentive to work together? Ms. Mute, go ahead.
What do you mean by connectivity? Because I suspect what you mean by connectivity is not what we mean in France by connectivity.
Oh, what exactly do you mean, if you can explain very briefly?
We talk of connectivity when we talk about high-tech and telecoms and communications and GAFA. And I'm not sure that you were talking about the same thing.
Okay, Ms. Cui, you have to respond to that. Were we talking about the same thing?
Yes, we are trying to look for some more common ground exactly now. But of course, it will take some more time, because even now for this Belt and Road Initiative, even now from President Macron and the French government, they do have a more and more positive attitude to this initiative. But I could say that they will take some more time for public opinion in France and also in other European countries to follow up this common sense between China and Europe.
All right, Professor Tucker, let me come back with you about that balance question that I threw to you earlier. This is also about balance. On the one hand, you need to keep yourself politically correct back at home, and you also need to be energetic and proactive, but at the same time, you have to figure out ways to work with the other. How about that balance for President Macron this time? What about Belt and Road? What about this connectivity? Whatever your explanation is there some real thing to work on, Professor Tucker?
Well, indeed, that's a very interesting tool, if you wish, way of looking at what is happening in China over these a few days of the state visit, and the larger issues which will be with us once the visit is going to be over. And the word perhaps in that sense would not be connectivity, but perhaps correlation. In which way could there be a correlation or a parallelism, a positive parallelism between what Beijing may have in mind and Paris may have in mind? And here comes two major questions. One of them is on the French side.
Okay.
Does France indeed have an Asian Pacific policy? It is not obvious. Macron is a modern political thinker and political leader, and he recognizes the mighty role of China, emerging China, mighty China. But does he have concrete elements to feed into the international equations when it comes to conjunctural, punctual conflicts, such as the situation in the South China Sea, such as the situation over the Korean Peninsula? And beyond that, and here comes the Chinese element in that correlation aspect I'm trying to expose, the West is asking questions. France and other powers in the West are asking really questions, for example, regarding this huge initiative of the Silk Road, of the Belt and Road.
Initiative.
What are the real intentions of Beijing in launching this gigantic operation?
You got a question over there.
Exchange?
You got a question over there. Let Mr. Cui to briefly respond to that. We have to wrap up this part of the discussion. But Mr. Cui, you have to respond to that before we do.
Yes, I think that to deal with some regional challenges, including this territory issue, some other, is important. But we need to find, firstly, the relevance between China and France on this issue. Before President Macron come to China, French government gave a very, very positive, attitude to China's role in this South China Sea versus Korea Peninsula issue. But I think that now French role in this region, I mean Asia Pacific, in a constructive way, will be very, very welcome by China.
Okay, you haven't answered the other question, which is Belt and Road Initiative. What exactly is China's big ego, quote unquote, according to Professor Toker, coming from China?
Yes, I think that now we need to understand what's the relations. I think for China, the Belt and Road Initiative showcases Chinese logic to say that we need to deal with this, conflicts or some security issue in the region, but we need to deal with the development issue firstly. Once we did a good job in development field, we can try to find more resources and instruments to deal with other, security challenges.
When these kind of issues of understanding could not be handled all at the same time with one state visit, certainly we would not be able to do it also with one conversation. But I really appreciate the three of you for coming over and speak your mind from the bottom of your heart. Cui Hongjian and Elizabeth Mute and Joab Toker. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And stay with us on World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program, high-level inter-Korean talks are taking place with the South Korea-hosted Olympics just a month away. Can these talks really move beyond the sporting arena? What about for the near future? We're going to answer some of those questions when we come back. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday, live on CGTN. In a joint statement after the 11-hour talks, the DPRK pledged to send a large delegation to next month's Pyeongchang's Winter Olympics in the South. Meanwhile, South Korea released a statement suggesting the DPRK to halt hostile acts that raise tensions on the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK and South Korea have agreed to restore a military hotline starting from 8 a.m. local time on Wednesday, and the two sides have agreed to hold military talks. It remains to be seen whether athletes from the two nations can really make a joint entrance at the opening and closing ceremonies at next month's games. Athletes from both sides marched together during Sydney in the year 2000. Athens 2004 and 2006 Winter Games in Turin. The DPRK's Olympic participation marked a promising start, some say, to the first inter-Korean talks in 2 years. Take a look.
The ROK and the DPRK are back on speaking terms. Ranking government officials are meeting for talks in the joint security area of the demilitarized zone. And while tensions have overshadowed the past 2 years, this meeting got off to a cordial start.
We came to this meeting today with a serious and sincere attitude, and with the thought of giving our brethren who have high hopes for this dialogue invaluable results as a first present of the year.
Our talks resume after the North and South Korean ties have been severed for a long time. But I believe the first step is half the journey. I would like to hold this meeting with tenacity and perseverance.
The DPRK's participation at the Winter Olympics in South Korea next month is the most urgent issue. The hope is that a successful Games will lead to other projects, most notably reuniting families separated by the Korean War.
Moving forward, if the Panmunjom communication channel and military communication lines are reconnected in the eastern and western sea borders, topic discussions through direct meetings between officials from both sides will naturally occur.
South Korea and the United States have agreed not to conduct joint military exercises during the Olympics. But international sanctions imposed on Pyongyang continue to strain the Kim Jong-un regime. Despite relations between Seoul and Pyongyang seemingly on the mend, there's still no solution in sight to the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs. South Korean President Moon Jae-in says better inter-Korean relations should go simultaneously with denuclearization efforts. The hope is that the momentum from these high-level talks can carry over into other areas. What concessions each side is willing to make, though, remains to be seen. Shane Hom, CGTN, Paju, South Korea.
This is really the news of the day. For more on inter-Korea dialogue, we are joined in our Beijing studio by Rong Ying, who is the Vice President of CIIS, which stands for China Institute of International Studies. What a pleasure to have you, sir, here in Beijing. In Medford, United States, we have Sun Young Lee, a Kim Koo Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Welcome back, Professor, to our program. In Washington, D.C., I'm so happy to be joined also by Jenny Assistant Director of the U.S. Korea Institute of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She and her colleagues have been working on the Korean Peninsula issue for years with all the latest information. Thank you so much for the three of you. This is a big day. I want to start with our two panelists coming from afar. Jenny, how about from you? What do you make of the real essence of this talk? If things didn't happen, it just didn't happen. But if when it happened, it really happens fast.
Yes, I think, you know, it's great. I think it's a great first step. I think the Olympics are an easy win because clearly North Korea wanted to participate in the Olympics. And I don't think the barriers to that were very high from South Korea. I think it's a little too early to tell how far this goes past the Olympics, though, as there's still a lot of issues to be worked out, and I think a lot of room for caution and a little skepticism as to what happens after the Olympics.
Cautious note and a bit of skepticism coming from Ms. Tao. What about from you, Professor Lee?
It's a great day for North Korea because North Korea has everything to gain and nothing to lose by sending athletes and officials and cheerleaders and so on to South Korea. In the joint statement, the word 민족, which is from the Chinese 민주, ethnic people, is mentioned 4 times in a 3-paragraph long statement. There's another word, kyore, which means basically the same thing. And paragraph 3 is really the crux of the statement, that the two sides will work on inter-Korean affairs by themselves, by the Koreans only, which basically means, as it has during the Cold War, exclusive of the U.S., standing up to the USSR, and during the Cold War, standing up to the PRC as well. So under this mesmerizing rubric of by Koreans themselves, we'll see discussions on family reunion meetings. We'll see discussions in the coming days on perhaps the reopening of the Kaesong Industrial Complex, where 50,000 North Korean workers were employed by South Korean companies. We'll also see discussions on the reopening of a tourism location in North Korea, Mount Kumgang, which was shut down 10 years ago in the wake of the shooting of a South Korean female tourist. So all this is good for now, but will this resolve the nuclear issue? Probably not. Okay,
Professor Lee, I want very briefly a response from you, since you said North Korea has nothing to lose and everything to gain from this specific step right now. Make me wonder, probably that's the same for South Korea as well. It has nothing to lose either. Well, it's only words on the statement.
It's good business for everyone, for the international community. The Winter Olympic Games have been underreported on. You know, it's now sexy, and sexy is not a word that naturally comes to mind when you invoke the phrase North Korea. But if Kim Jong-un unleashes the triad of sexiness, the female cheerleaders in the hundreds, of course, and also girl band, it's mentioned in the joint statement that North Korea will send not only athletes and cheerleaders, but artists, musicians, and maybe even Kim's own sister, Kim Yo-jong. It's a bit of a stretch. And Trump sends his daughter, Ivanka. Can you imagine the media frenzy and excitement that will ensue if the two women have a meeting on the sidelines?
Well, Professor Lee, I have to say you're very imaginative, and certainly you're creating the biggest gala of the world for the year. But before we do that, we see the Chinese side also had its response. The Chinese Foreign Ministry also responded to the resumption of dialogue. Of course, this is being said before the statements coming from both sides came out. So let's hear what the spokesperson had to say. Mr. Lu Kang.
We are happy to see that high-level talks between the DPRK and South Korea can take place. We have said many times, as a neighbour of the Korean Peninsula, we welcome and support all positive steps that will quickly allow an easing of tensions. We also hope that these talks can allow an improvement in the relations, push forward reconciliation and cooperation, and create a good start to ease the tense situation on the peninsula.
China was nervous about the situation. Of course, this could be a nice break from the intense situation, and yet does China understand very well the reality? Mr.
Oh
Rong?
yes, certainly. I think the reality is this is really a good news and great news
For today.
for today, and hopefully for the days to come. As we have seen that for the past year and more, we have seen tensions rising so high, and we see nuclear testings. You have missile launches, and also, of course, UN Security Council resolutions.
That's right.
So the tension. So finally, the good news coming for the beginning of this new year, now 2018, we had the news of talks, and now we have the talks.
But the thing is, it's a message about a breath of relief. But we do not know, if I could use a cautious note, what might happen after the Olympic Games, even leading up to the Olympic Games. Today, we've already seen, Mr. Rong, there are disputes from both sides about exactly what they have agreed upon. For example, whether there is real military talks from both sides that have been worked on and agreed upon. And there's also different views about what has been reached today, what has been reached earlier, for example, by the use of telephones and military talks on the west of the Korean Peninsula. So you see the disagreement already there.
Oh yeah, of course, it is only natural. I mean, for situations like that, for problems like that, I think diplomatic negotiations. So usually would come up with
part of the trick, right?
Yeah, that's the trick. The good news, as I said, is that finally the two sides are sitting together. They by taking advantage of these Winter Olympic Games to find a way to address the issues. To find a way to lower the tension and prepare to create a momentum to address issues that have been, there for so.
Got your point, Ms. Tao. Here's the thing. You know, we mentioned earlier in our program, the two sides, two Koreas, they marched together in previous Olympic Games, but nothing happened later. And meanwhile, you only see nuclear weapons and ICBM, other capabilities developed by the DPRK, and ever more intense situation. So many wonder what's going to happen after this. You earlier sound cautious with a reason. The question is there a possibility that leading up to the game and even after the game, this momentum of working together can still be maintained, given the DPRK's nuclear capability development schedule, given Washington's possible swaying of positions while understanding its own national benefits in this whole issue? Ms. Tao.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be cautious, and there's a lot of potential obstacles along the way. Yes, it's a great optic and it's a great symbolic gesture to have a joint Korean showing at the Olympics, and like I said, it's the easy win and it's the easy topic. But there are certainly a number of issues leading up to the Olympics as to whether or not, for instance, North Korea can refrain from further testing that would cause more provocations, whether the U.S. can refrain from imposing more measures such as more sanctions, or more measures like relisting North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism that would antagonize the situation. You also, you have the question of these military-to-military talks, and I think a large topic will be what happens to the military exercises. Yes, they have been delayed and postponed until after the Olympics, but they have not been canceled. So, will North Korea ask South Korea, for instance, to cancel that round of exercises? And is that something that South Korea is really willing to consider? And if it is, will it actually have the support of the United States, which I highly doubt in that process? So then what happens? And so, like I said, I think there's a lot of things that could go wrong over the next few weeks, even though, like, you know, this is a great day today. But in the details, there's still many issues that involve a much deeper conversation and involve, you know, greater implications, not only for inter-Korean relations, but for the whole situation, especially dealing with North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
Devils are in the details, as we know. Professor Lee, though, what about those questions posed by Ms. Tao? Of course, those are very well-assessed questions. And this is the realities all sides have to face. They probably have to make up their mind as to what they really want to do. So this is really a starting point of new testing ground for everybody's goal and ego. Professor Lee.
Well, since I'm so giddy and happy and elated and wildly imaginative today, may I just say, looking into the future, you know, February 16th is Kim Jong-il's birthday. It is the second most important national holiday in North Korea, next to April 15th, the founder's birthday. And this year, February 16th, just happens to be Lunar New Year's Day. And in the past, we know North Korea has conducted a nuclear test on the eve of the founder's birthday, as well as Kim Jong-il's birthday, for example, in 2013. If North Korea did something naughty like that, right in the middle of the Olympic Games, what will happen? With athletes and visitors from almost 100 nations all gathered in South Korea, will the Trump administration withdraw American athletes, resort to a military response? I don't think so. So in effect, just by sending people, North Koreans, into the South, Kim Jong-un has basically won, you know, a powerful deterrence against the next provocation. So this is very crafty. It's very, you know, very clever of North Korea to do this.
Well, we're happy and gay for today, but we are also very cautious about the future. Mr. Rong, here comes China's role. I mean, China's role is always there, trying to bring everybody together, trying to come up with a plan, trying to come up with a consensus, and trying to send, you know, representatives of different countries, trying to talk out. Maybe there's some common ground we can work on together. China talk about the double suspension. Of course, that is for a much longer term rather than just, you know, 1 month's time for all sides. Are we gonna see further explanation and development of this so-called double suspension strategy coming from China for all sides to calm down and possibly focus on the next step and the common ground?
Oh yeah, this is a great question. I think the idea to have so-called suspension for suspension first came from the North Korean side. And the Chinese, of course, I mean, took over and then make it as a kind of initiative that would help, I mean, the parties concerned to reduce the tension.
We explain to our viewers double suspension or suspension for suspension means, you know, the DPRK suspend their development of nuclear weapons, and the United States and South Korea suspend their actions that would so-called provoke the DPRK, including the joint military exercise. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Rong.
So far, we are literally, despite the fact that neither side are talking about that term, we are having actually the de facto suspension for suspension. So we are only so far. And the Chinese side is very warmly welcomed, if you follow the foreign ministry's spokesperson's remarks. And they also support that, and it's a call upon all the parties, international community, to help them, to help maintain that momentum and make sure that the issues that are being there would be hopefully in the sense that prepare the ground for the continuation of this momentum. And I think the previous speaker talking about that there are a lot of things could go wrong. I would argue that there are quite something that if we can get it right, it can go right.
Yeah.
So this is just the beginning. Let us be hopeful, of course, with caution. But if we hope for best, I think we are definitely not going to have the worst.
Okay, half empty, half full. We all understand that. So let's talk about, before we come to the end of the program, very briefly from every one of you, what are some of the things that could happen positively and that would maybe benefit all the important players of this issue? Let's go with you, Ms. Tang. Usually the lady go first with the most challenging question, right? So Ms. Tang, go ahead. What could be done?
You know, we are hopeful that this will turn out to be an opening and a chance to expand on inter-Korean relations and improve inter-Korean relations, which have been at its worst point in years after the Park Geun-hye administration. We know that Moon Jae-in, for instance, this is the policy platform that he was, you know, putting forward in his campaign as well. So it gives him an opportunity to try and exercise that platform. And if things do go well, it could potentially lead to an opening for better U.S.-DPRK relations as well.
Right.
Granted, again, of course, if North Korea can behave itself in that process, and if there's enough incentive to prevent North Korea from continuing to test and continuing to engage in provocative behavior.
All right, as long as there is...
My concern...
Go ahead, very briefly.
I do have a concern, though, is that, you know, one of the inter-Korean economic agendas will be very difficult to come to agreement on without consensus from, for instance, the United Nations Security Council because of sanctions that would restrict Kaesong Industrial Complex in Mount Kumgang. So
that's right.
Like I said, there's a lot of reason to be cautious, but there is reason to be hopeful as well.
All right. The other two gentlemen, we only have 40 seconds left, so 20 seconds for each of you, just to be fair. Mr. Rong, you want to go first? 20 seconds.
Oh, only I want to argue that instead of looking at the positive side, if we want to have a positive result, let's see what would be the negative or possible sort of obstacles there. So I would argue that let's try to identify the possible barriers that would prevent the positive outcome we're looking for.
And work on them. That's the most important thing. And Professor Lee, final words, 20 seconds.
In the short term, you can see the single-shot reunion of families separated between the two sides going back to the Korean War. And this is a heart-wrenching, emotional affair, very meaningful to the people. A 90-year-old mother who has not seen her 70-year-old son in 6 decades. It's a very, very meaningful, high drama. But now South Korea, I hope, will muster up the courage to demand, to call on North Korea to allow these people to continue to maintain contact, exchange of letters, phone calls.
I can see on this topic, everybody wants to continue our discussion. We'll have further opportunities, ladies and gentlemen, in the future. Thank you so much for joining us on this very significant, at least so far. Thank you. We want to express our appreciation, Rong Ying, Sun Young Lee, last but certainly not least, Jenny Tang. Thank you so much. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, everyone in the World Insight team, thanks for watching. See you next time.